Today, we want to talk about the importance of venture capital for driving innovation in life sciences in the EU. The environment has changed. Raising capital has become more difficult. We have structural challenges in the EU for venture capital, and we have a regulatory environment that doesn't make it very easy for VCs to succeed. Everybody wants successful biotech companies, wants the new biotech in the future. And today we will take a look at that, how we can potentially achieve that and what the challenges are. With us today is Dr. Sascha Berger, who is a general partner with TVM Capital and an LSAA board member. Thank you for joining us today.
I think this is a very important topic because public funding is a very relevant source for the initial discovery of new drugs and mechanisms. And pharma companies obviously play an important role in commercialization of these innovations later on. But in between, biotech companies, small companies, new ventures are an important element in driving these innovations forward, for translating that research into actionable and real products. And this is a risky endeavor, and venture capital funds are a very important source of providing the financing for these young companies to survive and drive innovation forward. And it's fairly often called the valley of death, this risky endeavor. And the discussion today we're having is how to improve the situation for those backing these innovative companies is an important one. Because I think we're lacking behind, and there are challenges we have to discuss, and also solutions we can highlight.
I've heard, and it was also in the media, some venture capital firms have been able to raise substantial amount of money, but it's basically concentrated in one huge fund, which also has drawbacks. I mean, it would be better for the ecosystem if it's a broader spread. So how do you work actually in getting funds raised? How does typically a venture capital firm go about that?
Yes, I think this is an important part of the story. There are several larger funds in Europe, and that's also a great development that we see a few more of the larger funds being raised and active here in Europe. But compared to the North American markets and also Asia, this is significantly less. So the numbers here are in fact staggering. So if we take a closer look at the gross domestic income in comparison of comparing Europe, Asia, and the US, and how much of the gross domestic income is invested in venture capital, we see a quite significant gap in Europe versus North America and the US in particular, which is a structural disadvantage over time, and it's not closing, but the gap is widening, and that is a clear indication of the lack of funding sources for biotech and venture financing in Europe. The local funds here have to syndicate if it's a larger round, often with funds from outside Europe, which per se is not a bad thing. This is how this industry works. We always collaborate. We finance companies together. This is a certain way of risk sharing, of diversification, and also ultimately is helping the companies because they have different inputs and different sources of capital and do not only rely on one single source. But coming back to the initial question of how do venture capital funds get their money to invest, we have to look at a situation in Europe where it's challenging. It is the fact that venture funds most notably rely on public and institutional investors. Here I have to spell out in particular pension funds. And here the situation in Europe is slightly different compared to others because it is quite scattered. We have countries where pension funds are a reliable and robust source of financing for funds. However, the percentage available of capital those pension funds invest is relatively low. So investors are rather risk averse and do not provide that capital to VCs. And besides that scarcity of capital, moreover, sources of capital which are available elsewhere are completely non-existent in Europe. And I want to speak about, for example, about endowments and foundations, which are a relevant source of capital in other parts of the world, however, not so in Europe. So the question really becomes how to incentivize those financiers, how to incentivize those sources of capital, and how to make that available for venture funds to, in the end, allow biotech companies create great drugs, which is risky and requires capital.
The regulatory environment in Europe is really the barrier. And of course, the argument is we're trying to protect investors. We're trying to protect those who shouldn't really go into very risky investments. But at the same time, especially pension funds have a very long time frame. And for them, it is really an asset class that is not something that would not fit with their investment profile. But regulators have decided they cannot do that. And unless we change that in Europe, we will not really have a comparable amount of money available to raise for venture capital, which is really driving innovation, especially in life sciences, which strangely enough, again, the same policymakers want to have a successful industry. They want to build a life sciences sector that's very strong. But at the same time, we don't really have an environment that allows you and other investors in this space to really tap into the large amounts of money that should be available.
No, absolutely. And I think the general idea to protect the general public from going into too risky investment classes, and venture capital certainly is a risky investment class, because the investments we do on ourselves and investing in early stage biotech or medtech or other life science opportunities is very risky. And the model only works for us because we spread the risk by investing in multiple opportunities. And that's also the major learning maybe or lack of understanding on the policymaker side is that the general public is in not investing in or encouraged to invest in a single biotech company. I would not necessarily recommend my grandmother to invest in a single biotech company if she wants to protect her pension. I would not do that myself. But that's why institutional investors like funds, like TVM, like others are there, and also why pension funds are there. These are professional pools, professionally managed pools of capital and diversified pools. So limiting pension funds, endowments on the one hand, or not encouraging them to invest in venture and other alternative asset classes is a step too short, right? It's neglecting the fact that we're talking about professional investors. And overall, the case in the US has shown very clearly that over time, these asset classes generate higher returns. So overall, for growing pensions, it would be advisable to open up these classes of investments.
Yeah, we have been talking a lot about money now, and indeed you have the fundraising challenge and you also have the investing challenge. Where does the money go? How do you pick the companies? But we shouldn't forget that you have also another role, which is substantially bringing knowledge, expertise into these companies, being an active advisor along the road and help those companies to be successful. How do you see that part of what you do?
You're right. I mean, this is not just talking money here, but this is talking advice, experience, and hands-on support, and that differentiates an experienced venture capital fund from a bank and from a public institution. We do not invest in hundreds of opportunities where we kind of sprinkle the money, but we select certain opportunities. We have a portfolio of a few dozens of companies, and each and every of our partners, including myself, takes on personal responsibility for managing these investments. And supporting the companies early on. So we spend a lot of time due diligencing the opportunities to see if this is a valid and interesting investment opportunity. But on the other hand, we're not just placing a bet and put money at work and then wait and see, but we're supportive. We want this to grow. We want this to be successful. So that's why also this industry is called smart money. And I hope we can prove with our work that indeed this is smart money. Because we go into these companies, we go on the boards, we help founders connect, we help them raise additional capital. We provide the networks when it comes to operational challenges. So that actually my daily work is much more around selecting and supporting companies than talking about money.
Policymakers often think that if you throw more money, government money against it, you can fix this problem and you can find a solution. There is a lot of money that is coming from government, especially for the translation part when it comes to R&D in academia, when it comes to bringing it into the first sort of baby steps in commercial ventures. But it usually is just not enough and not big enough, the amounts that are available to really go into the validation phase, clinical studies phase. That is really where a lot of the private investors' money is so invaluable, and if it's limited, that is also limiting the development of a number of those very interesting new technologies, new platforms, new drugs that are created in the labs. But as I said, policymakers still sort of believe that they could potentially step forward and make it even bigger, the money that is invested. But based on what you just said, that cannot really be the solution, because that comes without the expertise, that comes without the personal involvement and the whole industry. I mean, there are quite a few very experienced colleagues in other firms overall in the venture capital industry that really cannot be replaced and will not be found in government structures, right?
No, right. I think it's a great initiative. First, I mean, to make things work, it's like in a soccer team, you need different positions and people, right? And only if everyone is contributing, we will be successful. So the nurturing of early innovation is a crucial step to bring new ideas to life. But it shouldn't stop there, right? If you have this tiny little plant where there could be a huge tree coming out of that, you need to nurture. And as we discussed, money is an important step, but it's not everything. And here, the experience and the hands-on support of professional investors and venture capitalists are crucial, as we have seen in so many cases over the past decades. So the tricky part is, how do we enable and nurture innovation and bring it to a concrete product in the end. So speaking about drugs, as you rightly say, if there is a drug candidate identified, that's a good thing. If we have all the academic institutions, we have maybe a small company being spun out of a university. That's a crucial first step. But how to then finance clinical studies, which will take potentially hundreds of millions of dollars, that's nothing where public institution would jump in. And that's where private capital is so crucial. So if we now take a closer look at the size of the rounds and also comparing Europe with North America, the US, and comparing the global situation, we see that in early stages, so on the angel seed round side, we're pretty much at par with other regions of the world. If we get into early stage VC, there is a gap, a significant one in Europe already, and unfortunately, that is not close if we go to later stage venture capital, which is a fundamental source of financing for the life science ecosystem, given the capital needs and getting therapeutics through clinical studies into the market, and also other life science innovation. So here the structural disadvantage of European-based companies seeking venture financing in Europe is obvious. And here the policymakers, I think, have to act, and that this is a call to action to change, in particular, the funding situation in the later stages of the development.
What are typically your investors in the current situation? And of course, the interest rate raises have changed quite a bit. Where would you say is or what type is a typical investor in European venture capital funds?
The role of certain national and pan-European institutions like the EIF should not be underestimated. So this is a crucial facilitator of the industry, and there are also family offices, so private capital. But what is really missing, getting back to that point, are the massive sources of pensions, of endowments, of insurances, and here a lot of money is available. The current system we have in Europe, where certain tax, certain regulatory disadvantages prevent these large pools of capital to significantly invest in venture capital, and that is something we have to change to be able to really grow the sector and not fall even more behind the United States, and now coming up also China. Because the result then would be that European biotechs even more are dependent on external outside US financing, and that's already an issue today. And in situations like today, where interest rates are an issue, where uncertainty on global political stability make cross-border investments and international investments maybe more challenging. Those are the first investors who pull back their money or do not continue investing, and then those promising European companies are left behind, as we see today. If I'm on conferences, it's not the question how competitive financing rounds are and who can get in first as an investor. It's unfortunately the other way around. Companies are really struggling getting larger rounds together. And that's also because international investors are currently more reluctant to invest in Europe these days.
So we have structural deficits really in Europe that make it harder and really, in a sense, is a barrier to achieving what the policymakers have said. We want to build a strong life sciences industry in Europe, especially in Germany. We want to be back to become the apothecary of the world again. We want to have production move to Europe. We want to have innovative drugs. I was just at a conference, and we don't want incremental innovations, although they are also important and have their role, but we want true new approaches, new platforms, new drugs, new treatments that we manage to get to the patient all the way to the end. And in reality, we are drying out the ecosystem. And also, I talked to a CEO of a company, of a startup, who said, if I'm not taking Chinese money, which I don't want to, I will have to fold my company because I can't continue to finance it. And we are on a good path to create something that is valuable, but there's just not enough money to go around. So it is overall really challenging environment that does not help to achieve the objectives that are set out. What is it that you would see as the major sort of changes that would help create a better situation?
The question really is, do we as Europeans want to be left behind, or do we want to tackle those challenges ourselves? Do we have the financing, and do we have the funds to back innovative companies here in Europe? And to do that, we need to mobilize the capital. There is enough capital available. Europe is a rich continent. We discussed that before. And it's the question on how to get the horsepower on the street, to stay in that image. So we need to incentivize professionally managed capital. And to incentivize that, there are multiple levers. One would be to increase public institutional funds, investing in venture funds itself, so fund of funds. There are some ideas which are discussed in Europe and on national level. I think that's the right approach. We have to reduce tax barriers. We have to reduce regulatory hurdles to make it attractive for new funds to be set up in Europe, and funds to raise larger amounts of capital. By doing so, we reinforce the local ecosystem, and we allow funds to syndicate, to have enough capital to also invest when it's not just about smaller rounds, initial rounds, but really about transformational approaches which require 50 million, 100 million financing rounds. And here, tapping into the capital sources of insurance companies, of pensions, of foundations, would provide the capital which basically allows these funds to exist. And with that, I think we can really generate a new agenda for life sciences in Europe. And not only talk about cutbacks and how to make things more complex. So I'm a big believer in inefficient markets, and the EU pharma regulation, which is discussed, has some very interesting elements. But overall, I think we need stronger incentives for venture capital funds to be active here locally.
And we haven't even talked about the now proposed EU pharma legislation, which will take quite some, probably years until it is finalized, but it is also introducing new elements of uncertainty and is containing parts that really will not help the situation. It's too complex to get into it today. This will be a matter for another webinar at another day. But just to sort of reinforce what you said, what we're looking at is way beyond this pharma legislation. It is an overall system error, you can almost say, because we're lacking liquidity in the public markets. Companies don't have the same valuation if they go public in Europe. We're having less funds available to invest through venture capital firms into a startup ecosystem. We have an environment that wasn't really very helpful and welcoming for biotech companies. That seems to be changing, but there are still remaining challenges. So overall, we have an environment in which it's really sort of working uphill for you and your colleagues, correct?
You're right, Rainer. This is an uphill battle, but to not give the impression that it's only uphill battle. Of course, there are also factors which are good and appreciated, and we should use that and to our all joint benefit. And I'm not just speaking as an investor at this point, but as a European citizen. Because this continent is a rich one. We have such a diverse base of research and innovation, and there is a lot of capital available. And the core task for us today is to mobilize that capital, invested today in areas which are promising and also give not just the founders room and the tools and the capital to grow their companies, but looking at it from an overall perspective, spurring this industry. We want a healthy European life science ecosystem. We want European companies playing a role in the international markets, and that requires investment today to be able to have that industry healthy and providing resources, providing solutions, drugs, and devices, and solutions to patients out of Europe. In an international environment, and that's where I think we all can work together to make that happen.
Yes, and to start or to finish with the positive view, the French government just announced that they are spending money building funds to bring production back into France, into Europe. Our German government has said that in the national security strategy, part of it is that we want to have the drugs in the apothecary available for patients who need it. So hopefully there is a change in perception. There's not only a change in how they think, but also change in action, enabling the dealing with the structural deficit and hopefully enabling you and other venture capital firms to do more for startup companies in the life sciences ecosystem, getting drugs on the road. And as you said, it takes a long time, 12 to 15 years until it's achieving access to patients, which also, of course, is influenced by the member states and their national regulations. So there's a lot of things that need to be fixed, but overall, it seems to be at least that there's more recognition of the need to change things and create an environment that helps you, that helps everybody, that helps patients to get what they need. So let's take that as the positive outlook for the future.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a passionate venture capitalist because I believe this to a certain degree changes the world and in small, but still, I love to see things grow, I'm hopeful that this can be done not just in other parts of the world, but it can also be done in Europe with European money, working very closely together with our friends in North America and in other parts of the world. This is an international business, but we should not solely rely on capital and financing from outside Europe.
Thank you, Sascha, for joining us today and for giving your insights. It's a fascinating and very complex industry sector, but it's also important. So let's keep working on that and hopefully bringing it into Europe in a stronger fashion state and with a better environment in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.